In the last video, we took a look at the ATI Rage LT Pro on a Compaq Presario from 1998 and discussed how it performed somewhat okay for 3D games. Now, let's explore something a little newer. In today's video, we will take a look at the Intel i810e integrated graphics. These have been around since 1999 and were also featured in many OEM computers at the time. The Intel i810 is a chipset designed for the Socket 370 series of CPUs, such as the Pentium III and Celeron. Targeting the low-cost computing market, the Intel i810 was Intel's attempt at integrating as much functionality into a motherboard as possible, and that includes integrated graphics derived from the earlier Intel i740. Which originally released with enormous fanfare, but sank from the market a few months after its release. Intel wouldn't return to the discrete GPU market until 20 years later, with the release of the Intel Arc. Specifically, the i810 is based on the i752, one of the successors to the i740. This chipset was also featured on my first childhood PC since 2006, the Dell Dimension L800R. I can recall that it didn't perform very well with 3D games, but most of the time with this machine was spent playing games like Doom and Warcraft 2. I also remember that it refused to run games like Quake III Arena due to the lack of OpenGL, which I assume was because of the older drivers. But then again, it's been a long time ago. So I thought about revisiting gaming using the integrated graphics, and one way to do so would be with the Dell OptiPlex GX110. It has similar specs to the Dell Dimension L800R, with the exception of upgraded SD RAM. The processor is a Coppermine Intel Pentium III clocked at 800 MHz, introduced at the near end of 1999. One interesting thing about the Intel Pentium III processor is that it comes in both Slot 1 and Socket 370 variants. Normally, the Slot 1 processors are easy to swap out, because you don't need to rely on reapplying thermal paste. And if you wanted to, you could easily downgrade to a Pentium II or even a Celeron. In this case, the Intel Pentium III is a Socket 370 variant with a heatsink and fan. But there was one time I almost settled with the Dell OptiPlex GX110 that had a Pentium III clocked at 733 MHz. However, I had to return it due to what I believed to be heat-related issues. I remembered it started to work sometime before it had to be returned. In retrospect, it was probably for the better anyway. Considering the 800 MHz Pentium III was the same one as in my childhood PC, almost like a more business-oriented version of the Dell Dimension L800R. But at the same time, the GX200 had an integrated Riva TNT2 M64 and used RD RAM for system memory. Next are the two sticks of 512 MB SD RAM, maxing out the system memory. Typically due to integrated graphics, the Intel i810e doesn't have dedicated memory, relying on shared memory instead, though I believe it was capped at around 32 MB of VRAM. There really isn't too much to talk about aside from the onboard components it contains, such as the 3-COM Ethernet adapter, which is useful for internet use and file transferring, and the onboard audio, using a SoundMax with the AC97 audio codec. I've noticed faster transfer speeds compared to the Linksys Ethernet card I installed on the Compaq Presario, so that's nice. Honestly, it's surprising that sound support for DOS games actually worked, but it lacks the FM synth and doesn't have native DOS support. But you could get somewhat better support if you wanted by adding a PCI sound card. The one thing I hate, which is already expected since it is a Dell machine, is the proprietary disk drive. It seems to have a hard time reading disk, and it gives me the idea that it's starting to act up. I had to struggle with the disk drive to get Windows installed. Speaking of Windows, I was originally going to install Windows ME, but I had a hard time trying to update the chipset, mainly because OpenGL didn't work. For a change, I decided to use Windows 98 2nd Edition for this one. I originally had Windows XP Service Pack 3 installed on it, but I felt like I was limiting myself to only Windows games. I wanted to somewhat maintain some DOS compatibility, even though there are certain games I like that are too sensitive to the CPU speed. Although not an OS I used at home since childhood, I can remember using Windows 98 for the first time back in elementary school, but it was on a Toshiba desktop computer. It was weird because I normally saw Toshiba laptops more than their desktops. Also, due to limitations with the integrated graphics, games can't use 32-bit color depth, but it can go up to 24-bit. So 16-bit color depth is the way to go. Now, let's see how much improvement we will get compared to the Pentium 2 300MHz with the ATI Rage LT Pro. To do that, we will take a look at the same games that were shown previously, along with some additional ones. Here we have Unreal Tournament running at medium settings and 640x480 resolution. Comparing it to the 300MHz processor and the ATI Rage LT Pro, which averages between 15 to 20 frames per second, the game manages to play well, reaching an average between 30 to 45 frames per second. Not bad at all for an onboard graphics processor from the late 90s. I always wondered how it would have been if I played this on my Dell Dimension L800R instead of the PlayStation 2 version, which holds a special place in my heart. I believe this would have been it. Next is Quake III Arena from 1999 using the default settings, and compared to the ATI, we see a significant increase in frame rate, going from 12.9 frames per second to 20.5 frames per second, which is not bad. Although with a bit of graphical tweaking, you could achieve around 50 frames per second at 640x480 resolution, which is better compared to 512x384 at 23 frames per second. Definitely an improvement compared to the Pentium 2 and ATI Rage LT Pro, especially with the upgraded VRAM. Next is Half-Life Uplink, the demo version of Half-Life. Honestly, I didn't get an average frame rate on the Compaq because I didn't install Fraps and couldn't figure out the command to show the frame rate. But safe to say, the heavy portions didn't show any signs of significant lag. And this is running on OpenGL, mind you. Unreal, or at least version 2.19, has issues with OpenGL being slow and DirectX being glitchy, so software rendering would have to do, and fortunately it handles it pretty well under 640x480 resolution. Either way, if you don't mind using the newer weapon sounds, I'd say stick to more recent versions like 224V and Unreal Gold 226B. Honestly, I call this a big improvement when compared to the Compaq Pentium 2, but how does it handle some of the more heavier games aside from Quake III Arena and Unreal Tournament? Here we have Serious Sam, or at least a test build from May 2000. Most of the time, the results show 20 to 27 frames per second on average, at 640x480 resolution, though it dips to around 15 to 19 frames per second when there's a lot going on. Also, there is something off with the weapon model not showing, so I tried out the evaluation build from January 2000, and the weapon models were shown. It's neat that I'm actually playing this build on real hardware, especially when the README recommends a 500MHz Pentium 3, and a graphics card like the TNT2 and Rage 128. The closest thing I have would be a TNT2 M64, but that is currently in my Pentium 2 Compaq, but that's for another video. At some point in the future, I plan to collect more vintage hardware. Anyway, the last game to check out is Gore Ultimate Soldier by 4D Rulers, running at default settings. Although not a popular game, I felt like it was something to check out regardless. It appears to stay steady between 30 to 40 frames per second on average, while dipping at around 20 to 25 frames per second when there's a lot going on. This game is planned to be covered in the future. Back then, this is what I grew up with, and there were some games that ranged from okay to just about unplayable. Alien Shooter is one of the games that performed okay, running steadily at 30 frames per second. On the other hand, after the end seems to be slow. much like how I remember playing it on my Dell Dimension L800R. And it didn't take until computers with Intel Pentium 4 processors and Intel GMA graphics could do better with those obscure indies. For any game that performed poorly, I had to use my mother's office Dell PC with those specs to even play them properly. The Intel i810e, while yielding better results than the earlier ATI Rage LT Pro, is somewhat of an okay integrated graphics chip. But if you want even better performance or aim to play the more demanding games of the early 2000s, I would suggest buying a dedicated graphics card. Now, if you were to upgrade to a dedicated graphics card, I would advise looking for one that is PCI instead of AGP, as the chipset's onboard video makes use of the AGP bus, thus lacking an AGP slot in the process. It's honestly unfortunate, because that limits the upgrade options, and not only that, there aren't many ISA slots, at least not to my knowledge. So you are also limited on the audio side in terms of maintaining compatibility with DOS games. However, if you want 3D audio like EAX and A3D, you could throw in a PCI sound card like a Sound Blaster Live or an All-Real Vortex. Well, there you have it. The Intel i810e could handle some 3D classics from the 90s to some degree, but the performance with more demanding games could vary. The system's shared memory, while an interesting idea, does have its limitations, and Intel wasn't really a good gaming option. So, for serious gaming, it's advisable to invest in a graphics card from Nvidia or ATI, or a 3DFX card. However, by the time this machine came out, it would be 2 years before they became defunct and were acquired by Nvidia. Anyway, that about wraps up this video. But before I go, I want to remind you that this channel is nearing 700 subscribers, and you, the viewer, watching this video helps motivate me to make more content like these. I have set up a goal for this year. Can this channel reach about 1,000 subscribers before the end of the year? I won't remind you for every video that comes out, but if you liked what you see, don't be afraid to hit the subscribe button. It really means a lot. Until next time, and as always, peace out.